If you're old enough to remember actually watching your savings grow, a real number written down in pencil or ink, stamped into a little book with your own name printed on the cover, you already know something has changed that most people watching this today have never once experienced for themselves in their entire lives. It wasn't that your family earned more money back then, not in most cases. Adjusted honestly for what things actually cost at the time, plenty of households earned considerably less than an ordinary household earns now. Saving was simply easier, structurally, in ways nobody had to think about or work particularly hard at, because the whole world around you was quietly, almost invisibly built to make it possible, without much effort required on your part at all. Here are the reasons why, and if you lived through even half of them yourself, you'll recognize every single one before I've even finished describing it. You remember the stores closing, not just late at night, but early on most weeknights too, and all day on Sunday without a single exception made for anyone. A hard, firm stop. Nobody questioned or tried to work around, no matter how badly they wanted something in that moment. There was no scrolling through a store at midnight because sleep simply wouldn't come, and the phone was right there in your hand anyway. No browsing on a quiet Sunday afternoon, purely because there was nothing else in particular to do with the time. The hours you could actually spend money in were limited, plainly and firmly, by the clock on the wall and the calendar on the kitchen door. And that simple limit did a real amount of your saving for you, without your ever having to exercise a single ounce of conscious willpower against it. You remember that nothing was following you home, or into your own living room, or waiting for you the moment you woke up the next morning. No advertisement had ever seen what you'd looked at yesterday and quietly, cleverly decided to remind you of it today, tomorrow, and the day after that, following you from one screen to the next. A catalog arrived in the mail, thick and glossy, and you flipped through it once, maybe twice on a slow evening, and then it sat on a table until someone finally got around to throwing it out weeks later. There was no algorithm patiently studying your habits, learning exactly which moment of exhaustion or boredom made you most likely to buy something you hadn't actually been looking for in the first place, waiting for that exact moment to strike. You remember the passbook, the actual physical book from the bank with your own name printed carefully on the front cover, handed across the counter to a teller you likely knew by sight to be stamped by hand every single time you made a deposit, however small. You could open it whenever you liked and see, in real ink pressed onto real paper, exactly how your savings had grown, line by line, visit by visit, across months and years of ordinary deposits nobody thought twice about making. That book sat in a drawer at home, easy to reach, and every single time you opened it, the numbers were real in a way a balance simply glowing on a screen has never quite managed to feel for most people, no matter how technically accurate that digital figure happens to be. You remember the Christmas Club account specifically, a small, fixed amount deposited every single week starting right at the beginning of January, locked away and completely untouched until early December, when the whole accumulated sum finally came out at once, exactly on time for the gifts you needed to buy for everyone on your list. Nobody sat down and negotiated with themselves about whether to skip a week when money felt tight. The money simply left your hands before you ever had the chance to spend it anywhere else instead, and by the time December actually arrived, an entire year of small, almost forgettable deposits had quietly become something substantial enough to truly matter. You remember layaway, a purchase set aside carefully at the counter with a small deposit and your name attached to it, paid off a little more at a time over the course of several weeks, and only then finally carried home, fully yours, the moment that last payment cleared and the balance hit zero. There was no other real way to buy something you couldn't yet afford in full at the time. You either waited patiently and paid it off gradually, or you simply didn't buy it at all. And that simple binary choice kept an entire category of debt from ever forming in the first place, since the option to finance it any other way barely existed for ordinary purchases. You remember paying for nearly everything in actual cash, counted out carefully at the register from your own hand, watching the amount left in your wallet visibly shrink with every single purchase in a way that felt real, immediate, truly impossible to ignore or explain away later. There was no quick, painless tap of a card that barely registered as spending money at all. The transaction over before you'd even had time to think about it properly. Every dollar spent was a dollar you could physically see leaving your own possession, and that feeling alone kept plenty of purchases from ever happening that might otherwise have felt easy, forgettable, and consequence-free in the moment. You remember that almost nothing recurred automatically each and every month the way it seems to now, quietly pulling money from an account without your ever having to actively decide anything at all about it, month after month, often forgotten entirely until a statement showed a charge you'd stopped thinking about. A magazine subscription, maybe, renewed once a year with a real, deliberate decision behind it each time it came up for renewal. Beyond that, spending happened one purchase at a time, each one a real, individual choice made consciously in the moment, rather than a standing arrangement quietly running in the background of your life that you'd have to actively remember existed at all, let alone remember to cancel. You remember, too, that a single price stayed a single price, printed once on a shelf tag, and holding steady for months at a stretch, not shifting hour to hour the way it so easily can now. No flashing countdown clock manufacturing a false sense of urgency where none actually existed in reality. There was no real reason to buy something today, specifically out of fear the price might jump tomorrow, some mysterious algorithm deciding overnight that the same item was suddenly worth more. Whatever you needed would still cost roughly the same the following week, and that quiet, dependable stability meant you could actually wait, think it over properly, and decide with a truly clear head, rather than a manufactured sense of panic pushing you toward the register before you'd had time to reconsider. You remember your neighbors not knowing what you bought or when you'd bought it, or how much you'd actually paid for it, because there was no real window into anyone else's purchases the way there is now. No endless feed of other people's brand new things scrolled past first thing in the morning before you'd even had your first sip of coffee. Comparison existed, of course. It always has in some form or another, in every era. But it was limited to what you could actually see with your own two eyes, on your own street, in your own neighborhood, not amplified constantly and endlessly by a stream of carefully curated purchases from hundreds of people you'd never even met in person and likely never would. And you remember, maybe most of all, that a company job often came with a pension quietly attached to it, a promise of income later in life that didn't rest entirely on your own shoulders alone, to build and manage from absolutely nothing, year after year, with no outside structure supporting the effort. That single structural difference took a real, measurable weight off individual saving that's almost impossible to fully overstate now. A floor built directly into the system itself, rather than something every single household had to construct entirely alone, brick by brick, with no outside help of any kind offered along the way. It's worth pausing here for a moment, because if you actually lived through any of this yourself, you already feel the shape of what I'm describing, even before I finish explaining it directly to you. None of these habits worked, because your own generation had more discipline, more virtue, or more natural restraint than mine apparently has now, scrolling and tapping our way through an entirely different kind of day. They worked because the entire structure around you made saving the default, the easiest available path, rather than something you had to actively fight for against a world constantly, cleverly working to talk you out of it at every single turn. You remember mending, too, sitting down with a needle and thread over a torn hem or a missing button rather than reaching immediately for a replacement, a skill nearly every household actually possessed and used regularly rather than outsourced entirely to a store shelf. Clothing lasted years instead of months, not because the fabric itself was necessarily better, but because someone was willing to sit down and fix it the moment something went wrong, rather than treating the first flaw as a reason to start over completely. You remember, too, that repair was always the first instinct, not replacement, when something around the house broke down. A radio, a toaster, a pair of shoes with a worn sole, all of it got fixed, rather than thrown out, and quickly replaced with something new, bought without much thought behind the decision. A whole category of spending that's routine now, Buying a fresh version of something perfectly fixable simply wasn't the automatic first move it's become today, and every repair instead of a replacement was one more purchase that never had to happen at all. You remember birthdays and holidays being the actual occasions for a new purchase, rather than an ordinary Tuesday needing no excuse whatsoever beyond a passing mood or a moment of boredom. Buying something simply because you wanted it, on a day with no particular significance attached to it at all, wasn't unheard of, but it carried a small weight of consideration. Most impulse purchases today never have to survive before the money's already gone. There was almost always a real moment of thought sitting in between wanting something and actually owning it, a gap modern convenience has worked hard, quite deliberately, to close as tightly as possible. None of these reasons required your own generation to be more virtuous, more careful, or more naturally disciplined than anyone watching this today. The world itself was simply built differently, with fewer open doors for money to quietly slip through unnoticed, and fewer voices constantly, cleverly working to convince you that today was the day to walk through one of them. If any of this brought something back for you while you were watching, a specific passbook with your own name printed on the cover, a specific Christmas Club envelope tucked away in a drawer, a specific Sunday with the stores closed and nothing much to do but stay home together as a family, I'd truly love to hear about it. Tell me down in the comments which one of these you remember most clearly and what saving actually looked like in your own life, on your own street, all those years ago. I have a feeling I won't be the only one reading through what you write.